let's bring her out. She's already out, but let's bring her out a little further and see what she has to say.
Hi friends, thank you everyone for coming tonight. It actually does mean a lot to me. Dreamland also means a lot to me. And so when John first reached out to me about this, I was like, okay, well, I don't identify as an artist, but I like to say that I'm a very good friend for artists to have. I'm very good at structuring things and all stuff like that. And but I looked at myself from the lens of living in a cooperative community. So I live at Nickel City Housing Co-op. And I was thinking of co-ops talking about other co-ops or collectives. And so that made me think of Dreamland, which was a really important influence on me when I first moved back to Buffalo in 2013, 2014, and sort of like came back right as Dreamland was starting. And it just colored my world in ways that I am changed forever because of. So there I am. Oh yes, so, well, actually this is not too many people tonight, but I was going to ask, who here has ever been to an event at Dreamland? Or anything like that? Yay! Okay, everyone has. So there's the beloved building, which I wrote down that, oh yes, I need to open my notes at this point. Can't remember if it's 378, no, it's 387 Franklin Street, which apparently, it's called the Florentine Building, I learned, and I also learned hints that it used to be a different art gallery in the past, but I don't know too much about that, and actually it's something I'm interested in learning more about. Okay, so I wanted to start by centering with the mission because everything about Dreamland stemmed from their mission. So I'm going to read it briefly. It says, Dreamland's mission is to provide a cultural alternative for artists and patrons of the arts in the greater Buffalo area that nourishes avant-garde philosophies in various artistic mediums. Using models of various cooperatives, co-op housing, DIY, and punk spaces, art collectives, Dreamland strives to be an inclusive, safe space that is both accessible and comfortable to minorities, sexual, gender-based, racial, physical, and those of disadvantaged economic abilities. A major example of Dreamland's accessibility lies in its donation-based events. This allows the turn no one away policy that we found creates a strong sense of community and allows people who would normally be daunted by cost to experience a wide range of the arts. And so I think that everything that Dreamland was able to achieve really comes back to this mission statement. I had ideas of trying to create a very complex Venn diagram that had everything from, you know, the queers and people of color to introverts to metalheads to the punks, and showed that all these disparate groups sort of overlapped at Dreamland. And while I was not able to make that Venn diagram, I still think it's very true, and that this space was able to be accessible and inclusive largely because of their safer space mentality. And I use the term safer space as opposed to safe space because I do not think it's possible for any space to be completely safe, but I think that great strides in that direction can be made if you have that sort of focus and lens, as Dreamland did. There's a picture of the logo on the window. It's now gone, but it was beloved. Also, a lot of these images are going to be slightly low quality, and that's because a lot of the history I had to compile using Facebook. And I hate to say how grateful I am for Facebook in making this presentation. If not for the resources I was able to find there, I would not have been able to do this presentation today. Unfortunately, a lot of the documentation was kind of spotty coming from Dreamland, but they well documented what events were going on their events listing on Facebook, and I compiled from that, and also compiled a lot of the images from friends and supporters' Facebook pages. And so I do try to attribute where possible, but some attributions of whose photo it was I may have forgotten, and if anybody knows, please let me know. So I start here on the front stoop. So this front stoop became like so warm and accepting over time, and so you can see the image of the entrance there to the right, but also you can see really what you would see just about any event or show that Dreamland would host is people gathering on the steps, talking and engaging and really like building the sense of community. You know, I think that people, how casual and yeah, just like they're in their own home, you know, like, and that's very much what Dreamland was able to create. So in the beginning, around 2013, 2014, the first wave of Dreamlanders were these humans here. So Dana McKnight, who is a poet, writer, and multimedia artist, performance artist, and an organizer. Seth Gerard, a violinist and performance artist. And also, they are much more than this. This is just sort of a summary of them. Michael Berdine, who was a classically trained oil painter. Brian Dickinson, who also goes by Drow, who is a performance artist. Pierce McCleary and their dog Ruby is a photographer. Jen Kay is a painter, aerialist, and circus performer. Gala Katchen, very much a jack of all trades, also a tattoo artist and performance artist. Few people I did not know personally, but I'm kind of going on the names that I heard. Shoddy is a person who is a jack of all trades and a handy human. And then Shoddy's partner was apparently very cool. And then Sean Agressi, or Newt Smith, is a musician and an artist. So this was the sort of like founding crew of Dreamland. Not everyone lived there, but I do think actually almost everyone except for Pierce lived there. And Pierce didn't live there because Ruby, their dog, needed a different type of environment. So when Dreamland first started, prior to, where did my notes page on this go? Hold on. I'm sorry. So prior to Dreamland starting, Dana, Seth, Michael, and Pierce all lived in separate but connected apartments over on Trinity Place. And Dana had already been hosting noise and experimental folk shows at her apartment. Her apartment was dubbed the Night House because all the walls were painted black. And so she was just hosting these underground experimental noise shows out of her apartment and wanted it to be something more concrete. So they all organized and started looking for a space, but to be honest, they didn't really expect to find something. They weren't sure where they would find this dream location. And Dana found out about the location on Franklin Place, went over with a friend of hers who is a real estate agent who was a friend within her queer community, and they realized the place was available and perfect, and the rent, this was before really the wave of gentrification hit Buffalo, rent was $2,100 a month for this massive 2-story structure. I believe it was like 4,000 square feet, I think is what she said, but I'm not sure if that's actually what she said. On the second floor were rooms that could be used for artist studios / bedrooms, and on the first floor was where they had gallery space, exhibitions, and shows. And then there's another picture of them being goofy. And not pictured are both Brian Dickinson and Ruby, the beloved dog. Oh. Where do I point? Okay. So I wanted to show some of the founders' sort of creative side. So here is Seth performing both with Children of the Wild and busking in Allentown. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to point.
You don't have to point anywhere.
Okay. I'm pushing things. Okay. Here's some of Dana McKnight's video work. This is actually a piece where Dana is drinking maple syrup and whipping a woman who is eating a stack of pancakes. And then also this is her publication, Newports and Brownfields, of her writings. And then these are photos from a 2017 exhibition of Pierce's work of their travels across the country. So I really was excited to include this image because the queer identity is so central to Dreamland and what it was, as it centered the needs and desires of people of color in that queer capacity, as well as beyond. I had a wonderful interview with Dana when she was in town this past summer, and so I have some quotes from her I want to read. Dana said, "Having marginalized artists a lot of times in gallery spaces is extremely difficult because most marginalized queer and people of color are coming from an academic networking system. So if you're not in that space and you're still creating, there's really no access to the wall space you can get anywhere, especially because prices are daunting and the overall majority of queer, non-binary, and trans folk are scrapping just to get through. Job security for Black and brown folks is still super shitty in a racist city, and it's kind of everywhere. It was kind of huge to have Dreamland because we would have these shows and everyone would invite their friends," end quote. The effect was monumental and led to the rise in popularity of Dreamland, that queer folk would come to this space and they would realize how welcome and inviting it was, and they would then invite their friends and community, and it sort of had this ripple effect over time. For many different people who have marginalized identities, not just queer folk, people of color, as well as people who felt, introverts, and all sorts of people really came to feel that Dreamland was accessible to them. Dana continued that whenever, quote, whenever a show was happening, even if it wasn't queer-oriented, folks would still come through because the space was queer. We started expanding it more. When we first started, most folks coming in were very queer and queer-adjacent. So I wanted to break down, so the way I kind of structured this, because it was kind of hard to do a full linear story because there's a couple different aspects of it. So first I focus on the impact of musical performances and shows, then I talk about some events they had other than that, and then I go into their exhibition history. So this is one of the first music shows they had in 2014, a performance of a duo called Uncertain, Florian Fauna and Felix. This was another early musical performance they did. Steve Bachkowski, a local performer and musician, was part of this event with Bob Bennett. I'm not sure how you say that, but Bob Drake or Bebob, I'm not sure. And TJ Borden. And so I really also highlight this because I want to show that Dreamland was a very accessible space for experimental music compositions, oftentimes things that were like perhaps too experimental for maybe other established spaces in Buffalo. But really also, the space was exquisite itself, and so it really added to just this feeling of something quite special and monumental. And so I'm just showing sort of like the broad range of types of events that would happen at Dreamland. So this is a really fun one and kind of something I wanted to stop and talk about for a minute. So while Dana's interest was in punk and noise shows, at a certain point, metal shows started becoming a thing at Dreamland as well. And this was largely because there was a friend of a friend who was really into the metal scene and asked if they could have a metal show there. And Dana was like, sure, as long as they follow the rules, as long as they respect the safer space. So what this led to is that because they were hosting metal shows, there were many cis male, metalheads who were coming to these shows, oftentimes a lot of like big sort of like, aggro energy and what comes out in the pit and that sort of thing. And a lot of people within the metal scene were pretty adamant about being apolitical, that they were there for the music, they weren't there for identity politics or anything like that, though they did adhere to the safer space rules. But over time, many metal enthusiasts came to feel a pretty strong bond with Dreamland and a desire to protect the space. And this increased awareness of the need for safer spaces ultimately expanded many people within the metal community's understanding of how oppression affects marginalized folks and what it meant to be unsafe within a space. Dana described, quote, most of these folks within the metal scene did not go back to that centrist concept once Dreamland stopped hosting shows. Now most of them are hardcore anarcho, which is rad. They are radical. They are radicalized in the right way. And so I think this is one of the most exciting things that Dreamland really was able to do just by existing, is that by bringing in people who, come from maybe a more aggro space, or they have a lot of energy like that, by coming into a queer space that's centered on a safer space policy, they were really able to see that it could be there for them too, and that by engaging in this space, they were also adhering to protecting others within it, and they took that very seriously. And I'll touch on that a little more later. But I just love these pictures. I just love the pits that would happen in like this beautiful old building. Also, over time, they came to host everything from hip-hop shows to klezmer bands. It was really quite eclectic, the types of shows they would host. So this here, these are 3 posters from the DOPE Collective. The DOPE Collective stands for Dismantling Oppressive Patterns for Empowerment, and it is a collective of people of color who are working within these ends. So they organized a number of shows at Dreamland as well. And I wanted to tell just a really funny story that Dana had shared with me. At one point, and I'm not sure if it's the poster, I'm not sure if the show I'm about to describe is related to either of these posters, but these are the posters I was able to find. But the DOPE Collective apparently hosted a show that featured like a West Coast surfer band at the same time as they featured hip-hop artists from Buffalo. And so a lot of people from Buffalo's hip-hop scene, largely within the East Side, came to Dreamland for the first time. And they came to Dreamland and they experienced the space and saw how awesome it could be. And a mosh pit developed during the show, organized by some of the people who were more, familiar at Dreamland. And so for a lot of the kids from the hip hop scene, this was their first time in a pit. And so like everyone's in this pit all dancing together, and it was very loving and it was very supportive, and no one's getting kicked in the face, and it was just like a very safe space to have this like bonding overlap between Buffalo's hip hop scene and some of its more rock-based music scenes. Dana described that after the show, everyone wanted a group picture with the band, and the energy and the camaraderie between Buffalo's punk and metal scene and hip-hop scene was infectious. Spaces where such authentic intersections are possible is crucial for communities to develop empathy and deeper awareness of each other's humanity. And Dreamland made that possible in such an authentic way. So I also just want to highlight the creativity of some of the founders. So here is Dana and Seth and another Dreamland local, Rin. This was their performance as part of the 2014 Buffalo Infringement Festival. They were a noise metal orc band called Orc Smear. And so it just highlights about their creativity, their artistry, and their focus. Here is Pierce as well. So this is Pierce, Michael, and Seth. And I admit I don't know what this piece is called, but I think it's called Beats. And they performed this. This was, I believe, organized by Annie Kroll with a lot of work by a woman named Elena, whose last name I do not know, but I know that she put a lot of work into this. And so the Beats wandered around as a performance art piece, I believe both at the Echo Art Fair in 2014, as well as Music is Art. And so I think that's Music is Art up there. And just like wandering beats, like it's so playful and it's so light, and it's just, we need playfulness, and spaces that facilitate that I think are incredibly important. So also this is another sort of, I'm kind of doing some collaborations right now, so this is jumping a year ahead. This is the work of Tommy Dugan, who was a UB art student at the time. So Tommy did not have their major installation here, but they did have Dreamland artists participate in sort of a wander around town where everyone put on these soft sculptures and went to the park, went to various cafes, and so you can see Dreamland was really the staging site that made this possible. Many of Tommy's sculptures also remained at Dreamland over the next year or two, which I'll touch on later. So in 2014 is when they started doing their figure drawing night, which has been a long-standing tradition that still continues today. The figure drawing night is now at Sugar City, and I believe it still happens about once a month. And I don't know if anyone here has ever been a model for a figure drawing class, but I have. And I used to do it sort of at Buff State for the visual arts group that they had. And being in that situation, being a model for artists can be very uncomfortable, like everyone's staring at you, you don't know anybody, it's cold, it's awkward, you're naked. It can be a very, very difficult experience even for very well-adjusted people. And so I just really want to highlight how warm and comfortable and safe, this space that we're seeing here can be. And I think it really shows that when you have that safety, you feel more comfortable going outside your boundaries. And I think Dreamland facilitated that in a lot of ways. Also, this is just a great photo. So I'm going to talk about fundraisers briefly, because fundraising was a huge component for how Dreamland continued to exist they were a bunch of anarcho-punks, and it was very difficult to make the rent every month and also to raise the money for their 501c3 status, which they did successfully achieve. Nonprofit status ended up becoming super crucial for their security and stability, and I think it is a sign that they were more than just a bunch of punks and a bunch of anarchists. By getting their 501c3 status, it shows that they were forward-thinking and really trying to have a lasting impact within Buffalo. So this is an early fundraiser in February 2014. This is sort of when they were raising the money for nonprofit status and going through that paperwork process. But then also there was the Knockturn Alley series, which was everyone's favorite. This event happened 3 times at least. The challenge with some of my documentation and dates and that sort of thing is I'm really going off of what I could find online. So some things I might say, such as, they did it 3 times, may actually be wrong. They may have done it 4 times, but I could not find that documentation. So the best of what I could discern, they did it in January 2015 just as an adult event, and then they did it in October of 2015 as a kids event during the day, and then an adult event at night, and they did it again in October of 2016. So these are just, what comes up are just some fun pictures of how they transformed the space. The walls are literally covered with cardboard that they spray painted all those bricks on, and it was exquisite. It transformed the entire room, well, all the rooms. I did not include a picture here, but the hallways were covered with branches to feel like, these mystical spaces. And so this is one of the years where they started doing children's programming, and I just love how uncomfortable Dana looks. She's like, what are all these children doing here? But there they are making their wands. And here you go, this is the only picture of me in the slideshow. So here I am reading a children's story to a bunch of kids during the day. And then there they are. So I think this is the Quidditch match, right? Yeah. So outdoors with all these kids, it was really hilarious. Being there that day, it's just like, where did all these kids come from? But also, how can we keep them coming back until they're adults too? Being there that day, it felt very much like building something bigger. Like, oh, you're coming here now, but you'll keep coming. Because we all love Harry Potter. And so, this was another fundraiser they did in 1917. 2017.
Forward.
Yeah, very forward looking. But the one thing that all these fundraisers have in common is they're for nerds. They were all super nerds and really tried to play with that nerd community very creatively and own it, and really be proud of who they were and make spaces for all the nerds who want to come out and have wonderful, costume parties, but really don't have too many other places to go. So now I'm going to talk a bit about their exhibition history. So I'm going back to 2014. So one of the first events that I could find that they were advertising publicly for was in March of 2014. It was called The Last Rites of Spring, and I believe much of the work was by Florian, as well as the photos were by Florian. But there could be other artists involved that I couldn't find direct documentation of who was involved in what shows. Florian did take these photos, though. This was the next exhibition, which happened in April of 2014, called Nightmare at Dreamland. This was one of the first group shows that they did. The work that you see here is by Brian Dickinson, who created this absolutely incredible altar of bones in the back room of Dreamland, which later became the free store for anybody who has been there, the sort of backspace near where the bathroom was. And it was really, really incredible. Some other photos from that night. And David playing on the left. As well as, I don't know the name of the chamber group. But I think this really also shows just it was not just metal, it was not just noise, there was also high classical and experimental violin and space for all of this. So August 2014 was the first time that Wet Dreamland happened as part of the Buffalo Infringement Festival. This ended up becoming a really popular event that happened every year during Infringement. And the first year in 2014, I could not find as much documentation about. So this is the only image I have. Let me catch up in my notes. The relationship between Dreamland and Infringement was really intrinsic and very mutually supportive. In a lot of ways, Infringement helped empower artists at Dreamland to really cut their teeth and challenge themselves. But also Infringement benefited from Dreamland because it was a safer space that we could curate within and have some of the most, and I realize I said we, I used to be an organizer with Infringement, but Dreamland was a space where we could trust that it would be safe and people would be respected within it, so we could program our edgier stuff there. November 8th of 2014, there was a group show. The photos to the lower right are by Pierce McCleary. And I am not completely sure what this is, but I think that's a human. See, there's a human in there, and it's like a giant, I have no idea what that is, but it's a human. It took me a while to figure out what the heck that was.
I feel like I saw it installed somewhere hanging at some point.
Oh. Yeah. So after the first two group shows in late 2014, Dreamland started curating exhibitions a bit more intentionally in 2015. Cristiano Lopez is the artist pictured here and had a pretty major show here in early 2015. Lopez writes about this body of work entitled Porn Displacement. They write, porn displacement seeks to bring the hot into the cold, low-resolution JPEG images into high art paintings, the random into the deliberate, the multiple into the single. Displacement is also about attraction and repulsion, which the viewer experiences simultaneously, the seduction of the abstract image versus the disturbance of the original meaning. So given what you know about Dreamland, this is like an absolutely perfect show for the space where you're dealing with edgy, sexual, possibly uncomfortable subject matter that's also probably graphic in certain ways, but in a place where you can feel safe to engage with it and feel that your space is respected as well. And I think that is, again, the beauty of what Dreamland was able to achieve. For most of April 2015, Dana Tyrell had their MFA show at Dreamland. It was called Disembodied. This was the beginning of Dana Tyrell's relationship with Dreamland. Dana Tyrell is now someone who curates pretty heavily around Buffalo and is very involved within our arts community and is a really incredible artist themselves. Dana moved to Buffalo for UB and felt in some ways like they had not found a place that resonated with them. They hadn't really found a place to put roots down until they found Dreamland. And when they felt Dreamland, I think it was Dana actually who was the one who said, how did they say it? They said, Dreamland was the kind of place where you could just walk in and throw down your coat. Like it was your home, it was your space, and you were welcome there and you knew that before you even came in the door. This body of work was a combination of both like soft and hard sculptures. As we can see, I believe that is a mold of Dana's face. And so I do have more images of this series should anyone want to see it. Most things I have more images of, but I did not include them here. So the next piece I'm going to talk about happened on April 29th, 2015. And this was a one-night event by an artist named Selma Selman, entitled You Have No Idea. And so this was a video screening, performance, and discussion with Selma Selman. The event was sponsored by UB with support from Dr. Yasmina Tumbas, assistant professor in the Department of Art. So I'm going to read from the description. It says, "The bodies of Roma are in danger, as are their manifold cultural legacies and futures, which have not only been erased and violated by political and social mechanisms of systematic oppression, murder, and discrimination, but which have been, and still are, marginalized within the sphere of art. In collaboration with the Department of Art at the University of Buffalo, Dreamland hosts an evening with visual artist Selma Selman from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm not even going to try and butcher it, so from Bosnia, including the screening of her video works, a discussion with a Q&A, and a new performance work by Selma. So Selma is Roma and was studying in the US. And Bill, could I ask you to play that clip for me? So this is from this performance. So it's very short, but she did that for 45 minutes or more, saying you have no idea over and over again. Thank you. And I really wanted to highlight that because I think that is something that people who are not part of a marginalized community have to acknowledge, that you have no idea what it's like to be part of that community. And so given that, I think it is even more crucial and important for marginalized communities to have their own spaces, have spaces where they feel safe, because those of us who are on the outside really cannot know. And that is, a big part of my defense of the need for safer spaces, both inclusionary and exclusionary. It was an incredibly powerful performance. Here are other photos of that happening. You can see the room is packed. You can see her in the corner. And, it also must have been an incredibly intense performance for her to give, to be surrounded by a lot of Americans and trying to say this and have this moment. And so I'm also very grateful that she could have a space where she could feel empowered to do so. But then afterwards, there was a dance party in true Dreamland fashion. Everyone was dancing to Michael Jackson late into the night. So there are 2 other exhibitions I couldn't find images of. One on May 9th, A Show of Hands, works on paper by Deanna Scholes and Tom Holt. And then late May, which is Isometric Towers, a multimedia installation by Jen Sinsel. So then, in June of 2015, Dreamland organized the Dreamland Art Fair, and this took place during the Allentown Arts Festival. They write on the event page for this, during the full duration of the Allentown Art Festival, Dreamland will be taking over the entirety of its space in a massive curated art sale featuring dozens of local artists and a vast spectrum of mediums. Artwork will range between $1 and $250. So if anyone's been to the Allentown Arts Festival, you can imagine how maybe that would have made some of the organizers frustrated to hear of art being sold for $1. But this really is central to what Dreamland was all about, making art accessible, making the acquisition of art and being able to take it into your life, something that doesn't necessarily need to have a high cost to be able to enjoy it. So this year, was 2015, all the artists were selling work inside. They were in the building next door. And you can see more of Tommy's sculptures here. They were all still in storage, so they took them all out and draped them all over the building. From one person I spoke to who was there, oh, look, Carly, there you are. Yeah, look, you're right there.
Oh, how funny.
That's very Buffalo. So having talked to someone who was there that day, all the artwork was sold inside, but there was a vegan hot dog vendor who pulled up outside. And one of the people who was there that day reports that 2 people in a golf cart from the Allentown Art Fest showed up and told the food vendor that they had to leave. And the food vendor did. But my next slide here does show the distinct difference between where the Allentown Art Festival is and where Dreamland is. And so I really cannot imagine why people on a golf cart from the Allentown Art Festival felt so empowered to come and do so. The 2015 Buffalo Infringement Festival was active at Dreamland again that year. They both had multiple visual art installations as well as musical events, and also the Atari Soiree happened that year. It was a big hit. But everyone's favorite event came back. Oh, wait, okay. So I really did want to share this. So this is I guess this is the next year. So this is, even though I'm talking about 2015 right now, this quote by Dana is from 2016. So Dana writes, "Without the Infringement Festival 6 years ago, I never would have had the stones to share my own prose in front of an audience or perform solo noise projects. I wouldn't have turned my 1-bedroom apartment into a noise sound venue, the Night House. And therefore Dreamland wouldn't exist, or Orcsmere, or these fantasy stories you guys are about to maybe possibly read. Maybe I would have released them on my own energy, but I doubt it. Infringement gave me the space to try and see other broke-ass creatives do it too. and totally without the help of some magical state-based institutional / political / celebrity overlording it. So this final weekend, check out the insert in the public and try out an infringement act or project you would never think to, because people having space to create is important and anarchistic and just plain fucking wonderful. And so I really think this speaks to everything that Dreamland was and was able to achieve during that time, and how it was really these multiple points of this energy happening and sort of how they sort of were greater together because of that. So Wet Dreamland happened again in 2015, and this time there's lots of great documentation. These are some of my favorite photos of the pudding wrestling that happened outside. And so I highlight Wet Dreamland now, and I will highlight it again later in the presentation, because it is this sex positive, kink positive, freak positive perspective that is so deeply woven into what Dreamland is. Dreamland is an organization which can both straddle, pun intended, both respectability and freakiness, while always pushing for equity and advocating for the needs of marginalized folk. So having a place, especially for people of color who are so policed within our society, having a place where they can feel comfortable exploring these things out in public. Like, this happened in the front yard, and I can understand why maybe the neighbors had an issue with some of these things. But doing things together, you know, when you have community, you can create a safer space wherever you go if you go there together. And I think that Dreamland was an incredible example of how that can be actualized. I heard a story that the cops rolled by on this night when this was happening, and they drive up real slow as it's going down, and they roll down their window and they look, and they roll their window up and they kept going, and they were just like, we're not even going to touch that, and in some ways I also think that speaks to, it's anecdotal, I wasn't there, that might not be what happened, but I do think it also speaks to the fact that even within the world we live in, that sometimes the police can see, like, they're not hurting anybody, they're being creative. And to be honest, those are the kinds of police we need, and we need police who are going to see creativity happening and not try to shut it down just because it's weird. And you will notice they're wearing pasties. They're totally within the law. I just love this quote. Dana wrote, "Packed house and street throughout the night at Wet Dreamland. I'm about to shower off this summer sweat and mysterious traces of pudding attached to my body, so I can go to work and make sandwiches for office drones and pretend like nothing ever happened." So after infringement that year, in September of 2015, Jonathan Rogers had an exhibition of new work at Dreamland. And I also put that quote there because I thought it was so great. It says, "Dreamland would like to officially state for the record, Jonathan Rogers does not give a fuck about respectability politics in the art world, though he has the cred to do so, and we adore him for this." So then this is December of 2015. So Dreamland had a really strong relationship with Sugar City. And Sugar City is another collective-run art space in Buffalo. Sugar City was highly involved by Amy Bouye, who was kind of like Amy Bouye to Sugar City is to Dana McKnight to Dreamland, you can say, sort of like a mover and shaker, but not the only one involved at all. And certainly the torch at Sugar City has been passed more effectively, let's say, than maybe it had at Dreamland. Because there was a bigger structure and there were more policies and sort of like structural support that people could lean on when sort of that monumental figure moved on. A significant difference between Sugar City and Dreamland is Sugar City is always a dry space and offers all ages shows, but a lot of sort of those punk and metal shows have gone over to Sugar City since Dreamland has closed. Apparently when Dreamland was starting to work to get their 501c3 status, Amy Bouye brought a massive binder for Dana that had everything they did to work with the city, and it was very well organized with tabs and all these things. And so that community support of one organization trying to support another and sort of following the same path, I think is also crucial to even how far Dreamland has been able to come themselves. So this was an artist lottery. This was a collaborative exhibition that both Sugar City and Dreamland organized. An artist lottery is what it sounds like. All the artists who wanted to participate put their names in a hat, and then they were selected to collaborate together. This exhibition was the result of that. And Dreamland writes, quote, "In an effort to blast artists out of their comfort zone, Dreamland and Sugar City, or Dreamy Sugar Land City, have combined spaces to create Artist Lottery 2015. A visual arts lottery that paired two artists from separate mediums into a single collaborative piece that will be displayed at Sugar City and Dreamland, Dreamy Sugar Land City, in a massive group show." And so it was open to artists of all stripes. And so this collaboration, this building together also is just so important. There were a number of other significant events that happened in 2014 and 2015. I'm just lightly going to touch on the fact that one of the first events that Dreamland posted about publicly on Facebook was a self-defense class for queers and women. 2014 is also when the silent graphic novel reading parties happened, which is literally a bunch of people showing up, bring your own comics, hang out, and read together. You know, it was a party for the introverts, I like to think. In 2015, the Real Queer film series continued at Dreamland. It had happened in other locations prior to that, but from 2015 on, I believe it was Dreamland was the home for this queer-centric film screening series that was organized collectively with Squeaky Wheel. This was a dance party that they had after the Pride Parade on Sunday, June 7th of 2015, and it was called Blood, Sweat, and Queers. And what's important about this is that it was a alcohol-free, non-corporate dance party specifically for Pride. And so oftentimes there's a lot of critiques of, you know, Pride festivals, of the increasingly corporate nature of many of them and corporate representation, and also the, you know, alcohol-fueled sort of behavior that happens a lot of time. And, you know, Dreamland is really trying to center celebrating and also fighting for the queer experience outside of those corporate and also, you know, drug-induced influences. And so I do want to quote what it says here. It says, "We are sick and tired of corporate-sponsored pride. We are sick and tired of pride being an excuse to get wasted. We are sick and tired of how much we have forgotten our roots. On this day, we celebrate the queers who died and suffered for our right to walk the streets with our loved ones, for the queers who died and suffered for us to affirm our gender in the way we need to. We are still dying. Let's celebrate living." And so, like, having spaces like this, again, are so important. November of 2015, Stephanie Cassidy did a really powerful performance at Dreamland. I'm looking for video documentation of this, but it was multimedia. So in January of 2016, the Free Store first opens at Dreamland. And the focus of the Free Store was for artists to support other artists through barter and trade rather than through purchase. A free store is exactly what it sounds like. Everything in it is free. Anyone who had either artist supplies, clothes, various housing things, but not everything. Like, they didn't want the junk. They really wanted the good stuff. And they would be very discerning with saying, like, no, we will not take everything in your apartment. You know, they had a good eye for it. Having a free store in their gallery space might not seem like a big deal, but it is a huge example of how Dreamland lived by their anti-capitalist stance. They tried to offer whatever resources could be exchanged for free for their community. This further reinforces how Dreamland was not just an exhibition and venue, but it was also a space which sought to support the well-being of their community. You know, so they were really not just a place that people went to for an experience. They were a part of people's daily lives, you know? Like, if you didn't have winter jacket, you go to Dreamland. If you don't have brushes, you know, so many artists trying to create, there's such a cost to supplies. I don't need to tell anyone here that. But being able to know that somebody cared to make sure that you had access to what you needed to create feeds a very important part, I think, of people's souls that our capitalist world thinks doesn't exist. So in February 2016, Bodily Echo took place at Dreamland. This exhibition featured works by Trisha Butsky, Ashley Powell, and Jamie Schmidt. It was the second exhibition curated by Dana Terrell. I guess it's the first one curated by Dana Terrell because the other one was their work, was Dana's work. But it was Dana's second exhibition at Dreamland. So this is one of the first times that Dreamland got major press in the Buffalo News, and in some ways major press is a blessing and a curse. You know, like Dreamland was existing in some ways under the radar up until this point, and so by getting this sort of splash of attention from the Buffalo News, though it did bring more people in the door, it also did bring more scrutiny. The Buffalo News did write, though, they wrote, quote, "Dreamland is not your typical white cube of a gallery. Striving for sexual, racial, and gender-based inclusivity and accessibility, this Franklin Street space brings unique programming and difference to Buffalo." Which makes me think now, you know, what is bringing that difference? You know, like, this gap has not been filled. It was a very good show. Ashley Powell, also of, fame for the piece that she did at UB involving putting up the whites only signs on the water fountains in the bathrooms, who received just a lot of flack for that and a lot of stigma. And so having a space where, you know, even as everyone was coming at her, to have a space to really explore this work is so crucial. So in 2016, Selma Selman returned for a full exhibition. Dreamland writes, "Dreamland showcases the first U.S. solo exhibition of Selma Selman, Bosnian artist of Roma origins, currently based in Syracuse, New York. This exhibition, curated by Yasmina Tumbas, presents Selman's struggle with the question of statelessness, multi-generational trauma, and survival. Land and body become sites of emancipation and persecution for Selman, which the artist explores in video works, sound sculptures, paintings, and a new performance work premiering at Dreamland." And so here are two images I could find of this happening. You know, as you can see, she's in a state of undress in the corner. Again, like, that must have been so intense. And I can only imagine how much more intense it would have been in a space if you didn't, you know that you were safe within it. In May of 2016, the UMS hosted a group show called Bodies of Light. I don't know too much more about this. I would love it if anyone watching this or listening does have more information or images to share. And then in April of 2016, Ashley Powell had a solo exhibition at Dreamland, which was entitled Suckle, Installation Works by Ashley Powell. And I believe this work here is called Twerk, and it's all these sort of like these imprints within paper of body forms. In many ways, racialized body forms. Ashley writes, "Suckle offers an opportunity for us to enter into and partake in the most usable, profitable, and consumable resources that serves to ceaselessly quell the insatiable appetite of Western prosperity and white supremacy." So again, she was getting it from every side in Buffalo at this point, and so to have a gallery that supported her was crucial. And one that also, a lot of times it's not just respectability politics, but it's also what feels like the barriers to admission within established galleries. Like, it's intimidating, and they don't know you, and they might, not know exactly where you're coming from. But to be able to go into spaces and feel accepted can help artists create stronger work. April 29th of 2016, Chloe Higginbotham had their MFA exhibition called Quantity Time. It was I did not go to the show, but the photos look really incredible of just these sort of like lightscapes that took over the entire space. The text reads, "The time has come to connect and recharge with technologies. Quantity time is a restorative placebo therapy session for personal devices and their users. Enjoy extended wait time and unlimited phone therapy. Find new ways of relating to your tech. Let's see, Newt Smith, who was one of the sort of like early incoming members, had a multimedia exhibition in May of 2016. In late May of 2016, Errol Daniels had an exhibition of trans Americans, images of trans people in Western New York. And I will say, John, that's my kitchen. That's the kitchen I was telling you about. So this was a really powerful exhibition, and though I just have this one image up right now, there was many, many photos in this show. And again, not just as the photographer, but also as the subject, you know, feeling accepted, especially a lot of people are transitioning, going through that process. You know, it requires a level of trust that I think Dreamland really provided. In June of 2016, Paris Henderson's exhibition, Oasis, premiered. I do wish I had more photos of this one. This was the best I could find, but it really looks amazing. From what I can tell, Paris did a lot of fundraising around this, and I wish I could find more of the products that they were hoping to come out of this exhibition as well. They're probably out there, I just could not find them. But I do love this quote. Oh, let's see if I'm gonna be able to read it. It didn't translate really well. All right, so let's see, it says, and this is Dana writing, and so it's a tiger lily in a Colt 45, and so they're over there, they're in the exhibition. It says, the tiger lily, a staple wildflower on Buffalo's east side, from Paris Henderson's installation, are actually drinking the Colt 45s and surviving. There's a few really good metaphors in here about living in the hood and the adaptability of the natural world, but I'm just gonna let Paris Henderson make them. So in 2016, Dreamland was one of 2 organizations to be awarded Best Arts Administrator by Buffalo Spree. And I think this is really important to highlight, you know, because this shows that this is not just, again, a bunch of anarcho-punks. This is not Birdhouse. This is not, you know, people who are completely outside of these structures. They started outside of established, you know, art world structures, but they have been making space for themselves their own way and gaining recognition for it. It says here, quote, in its relatively short existence, this tiny space on the edge of downtown has done everything from attention-grabbing exhibitions to queer film series to dance parties to Buffy-themed club nights. Programming and other affairs are handled by the team of Dana McKnight, Michael Berdine, Seth Gerard, Pierce McCleary, and Amanda Rooney. And with every bold move they make, they leave us wondering what will they come up with next. Well, but yeah, look at them looking so badass in that photo. And I do apologize, I don't know too much about Amanda Rooney. Again, as with so much of this, I was really working with what resources I could find. I did multiple interviews with Dana McKnight and Seth and Dana Terrell. Created a questionnaire for some longstanding members to participate in, and really just combed Facebook. That's really what so much of this was. In July of 2016, Seedling, Installation and Workshop by Emma Lucille Percy happened. It's my understanding that this paper had seeds within it, and so you could both write letters on the paper and then send them, and then people could plant the letter, but also that there was some guerrilla sort of like gardening workshops happening in conjunction with this. So I also highlight this really to center Dana's activist work as well, and really the work of everyone who was involved in Dreamland in a variety of ways. This was a solidarity manifesto that Dana published, or was published by Dana in July of 2016. I'm not going to read all of it, but I am going to just read the end here. It says, we are the end products of red light police raids, state-sanctioned violence and Stonewall, water, dirt, and heat, make bricks to shatter windows and glass ceilings. A fight within us is equal parts tears and rage. We know both in equal measure. We have measured ourselves, and it is not lacking. We have measured ourselves, and it is not lacking. We have measured ourselves, and it is not lacking. This was a performance done as part of Infringement in 2016 on July 30th. It was called The Innkeeper's Daughter, and it was a performance by Angela Lopez, a really exquisite dancer and artist in Buffalo. This piece, I mean, I wish I could find video footage of it, but it was just so beautiful and expressive and weird. Really, so weird. So again, Wet Dreamland happened in 2016. And so we do have some burlesque performance here. Here we have Gala performing a burlesque striptease with a theremin. And so then also, I believe this is the same year, I think this is the right year, but also there was some like shibari figure drawing happening, as well as just like the classic image of Dreamland, everyone on the porch. Oh look, and there's Andrew. Yeah, see, you just see people you didn't even know who were in the photo. But this is Dreamland. The same night, both Seth and Chloe did a performance as part of Infringement, the Wet Dreamland event. It was a very sensual dance surrounded by sex toys. And then this photo here is the precursor of what came after. It was a menstrual water gun fight where everyone had water guns full with water with red food coloring, and they all had pasties on with tampons on the nipples. And it was just so weird and so free, and really normalizing these things that are still so shamed in our society, and just being absolutely unapologetic about it. And I'll be honest, I can't think of any place else where something like this could happen anymore. Maybe except for my front yard, but we're very public, and the cops would be there instantly, you know. But this space to be weird is so important. So in late 2016, Dreamland announced their Dreamland Artist in Residence program. And so their idea for this was for it to be a year-round residency program that houses one resident artist each month. DARP operates as a means of fostering marginalized contemporary artists in a creative art space founded and maintained by working artists. Artists in residence are encouraged to experiment with their practice in a creative setting in the heart of Buffalo's vibrant artist community. Artists are selected from a criteria that includes portfolio and artistic intention. DARP was developed to serve artists of color, queer, women, trans, and gender nonconforming identified peoples, but is an all-identity inclusive program. You know, like a lot of times, people of those identities don't see themselves represented in a lot of the traditional galleries, or maybe not represented with the frequency that they should be. You know, I'm not saying never, I'm saying not enough. And to have a place that centers on that and says, this is for you first, is very rare and is very needed. I think also that this artist in residency program highlights the seriousness with which Dreamland, again, took what they were doing. You know, they were not just there to be able to rent out the gallery for your MFA show. You know, they were there to really foster and support the development of artists. Dreamland, or I should say Dana, also was envisioning this as a crossover for artists from other countries coming in and trying to create a way where both Buffalo artists could then have a relationship with other sort of sister cities around the world to help facilitate Buffalo artists to go out and experience more. So, you know, that really shows like the vision and the long-term planning and investment that Dreamland is taking within the artists of this community. And also trying to find ways to better foster our artists' ability to go travel the world. In August of 2016, the exhibition Altercation Dreamer Solutions, Collage and Mixed Media by Altercation happened. And Altercation is a local artist who's still very involved with Sugar City. I do love their shirt. It says, "I'm a keeper." In September of 2016, Mickey Harmon and Dana McKnight released their graphic novel, New Buffalo. And so New Buffalo is a dystopian, gentrified Buffalo that is all too believable about our future, sort of post-apocalyptic, but still with the influence of capitalism and sort of the aftermath of that. I just love it. I mean, look at that. What are those called? Zubas? Like, what are the pants called that you... Zubas, right?
The sports team?
Yeah. I feel like that's very evocative of the Zubas.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a great publication. They do still have some of these for sale at Pineapple Company. November of 2016, a group show was organized, New Modern Rights. It was a number of local artists, but it was a group show where anyone could submit their work and then it would be juried. I'm not sure how strict the jurying process was, but a number of local artists participated. So, also in December of 2016, the beginning of some really scary stuff started happening that related to Dreamland. After the ghost ship catastrophe in California in late 2016, Dreamland was included in an attack on D.I.Y spaces, which was organized by the online group 4chan. There was a list of DIY venues all over the country that was organized by a DIY enthusiast, someone who loved these spaces and compiled this total list. And people from 4chan, which is sort of a hateful group of people online, who were looking to try to undermine and destabilize arts venues and DIY spaces all over the country. They gained access to this list of DIY spaces, and they published it on 4chan with all the addresses of these locations. They organized a concentrated effort to organize their community of 4chan users to call the fire marshals on each of these venues listed on the document to try and get sort of the fire marshals on the cases of these venues, not from a perspective of trying to increase safety, but from a perspective of trying to destroy alternative art spaces. And they very much use the structures of the system available as well as the fear of these spaces, and use that against these DIY art spaces all over the country. In talking with people connected with Dreamland, after this list was made public, Dreamland did notice an increase in unknown strangers coming to shows, coming into the space, people who clearly had no connection with the community and were not there to engage meaningfully with the community. And so this is also, this is what kind of brought some of the metal community sort of out of their apolitical stance in some ways, because they were coming to shows and they knew this was happening, and so some of the metalheads started like offering their support to watch the door. Dana's kind of stance was like, well, I thought you were apolitical, and it's like, no, but we want to protect the space, and so really kind of by realizing that they had a connection with someone who was being targeted, it really kind of helped them realize the importance of getting involved, that you can't be on the sidelines. Today, it's been described to me that there is now a tension, perhaps within Buffalo's metal community, between those who sort of grew in their analysis through Dreamland and those who didn't have that experience. And so those who were active in Dreamland are now stronger advocates for metal shows to continue to be safer spaces, and are better advocates to help ensure that people do feel safe and respected at these shows. And I think that is like a really beautiful lasting impact that Dreamland has had on the larger community going outward. This increased awareness of the need for safer spaces in all spaces, I think, can be tied to Dreamland and what Dreamland created. In January of 2017, Dillon, England had an exhibition of their collage work. I believe there may be more photos online. I was not able to find too much more. And then in February of 2017, a two-gallery exhibition was curated, again between Sugar City and Dreamland. This too was curated by Dana Tyrell. Artists involved at Dreamland were Jacob Cassay, Ann Moody, Tommy Nugan, and Jesse Pace were the artists who were at Dreamland. The other ones were at Sugar City. Around this time, this is when Dana Terrell started becoming more involved with Dreamland. I believe they joined the board around that time or soon after. They also started pushing, and I think it's a couple months after this exhibition, as a board member, they also started helping to organize a curatorial committee, to really try and create better structures with who got exhibitions and how, and sort of like honing that curatorial focus. And Dana was very influenced by what they had learned through their relationship with Sugar City and about how helpful structure can be to creating a long-lasting curatorial program. Here's another photo. Oh, John. Yeah, you took that one. These are more images of the installation. So in February of 2017, Ree Katz, who was the first Dreamland artist in residence, had their exhibition of their work. It was called Boy Witch Codex, Hypertext by Ree Katz. So it says in the description, it said, Ree Katz is interested in performing the poem as small, as disposable, as commodity, as board game, as synth video, as kink, as rosary. They are into giving gifts. I think this, let's see what's the, okay, great. I thought this was so great. So this is a post by Dreamland about a radio interview that Ree Katz did with WBFO. I just love, anti-fascist poet. Listen to Ree Katz share anti-fascist hypertext as part of the Dreamland Artist in Residency program. And Dana McKnight discussed the radical structure and foundation of our beloved Dreamland. I just love seeing it get that play. We talk about, this guitar kills fascists and all these things are much more common part of our lexicon now, but I do think that there are these little seeds that were planted in some ways that I think we see taking root. And perhaps that's only because of how difficult things are now, but I would say that we need Dreamland now more than we did then, and we don't have it now. And that's really scary. In March of 2017, Lindsay Tripp, their exhibition Floating in the Upmost Corner, New Works by Lindsay Tripp. And I wanted to read what they wrote because I think it just shows why Dreamland was the perfect space for this exhibition. And they wrote, the subtle comforts and energies radiating within the concept of home is a central focus of my work. Within my own social circles and environment, what I consider home has changed drastically and rapidly in the last few years, changing from a solid structure into an ideology that is constantly growing. This new understanding of home resides much more within the radically constant and playful love and support of my queer friendships, and within the effort to feel at peace in a body. Or maybe it is, and within the effort to feel at place in a body. Through a tricolor photographic process, I am seeking to capture and explain some of the invisible, internal energy present in these relationships, and to celebrate both the natural and domestic spaces that form the backdrop to this newfound home, merging them into one. Other significant events that happened in 2017, a lot of mysticism also happened at Dreamland, a lot of space for mysticism and spirituality and witchiness in various forms. And so there were some events that also centered on that. But I also love this last sentence here that says, for this top event in March, it says, Purgatory Variety Hour is a Muppet show of resistance. I don't know what that means, but I wish I was there. Also, this event down here in June of 2017 was an event where funds were raised to be donated to an anti-opioid organization, or an organization that was working within communities to fight the opioid epidemic, Save the Michaels of the World. So And another thing that also happened pretty consistently, not just with this sort of fundraiser benefit event that they organized, but Dana was telling me how a lot of times when they would have metal shows there, you know, they would take a collection at the door and there would be a cover charge or something like that. But a lot of times the band at the end of the night, you know, these metal bands or punk bands or something, would say, donate the money to Planned Parenthood, you know, donate the money to these progressive causes. And so I think that also shows how like this mentality is infectious, you know, and it really does, it creates more over time. So this is something really interesting that I didn't know too much about before I started doing this research. But on March 3rd, 2017, the artist Coco Guzman had an exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario that was completely inspired by Dreamland. So it says here, this is, you know, the text for it. It says, Dreamland invites us to become creators of a dream come true space of alternative and political art inspired by the collective and art space Dreamland in Buffalo, New York. And, you know, I think this is just a further example of this sort of like this infectious nature of what Dreamland could mean and become, that it was inspiring artwork taking place in other galleries. And I'm not completely sure, but the sense I get from this is that people were encouraged to write on the walls, but maybe they weren't, and maybe it was all set up like this, because I don't actually see anybody writing on the walls. But it looks like they did. But I love this. It says, art needs dreamlands to make monster to smash the system. And that's true. And Buffalo needs dreamlands to make monsters to smash the system. And we don't have it right now. Dreamland does still exist. I am intentionally talking about Dreamland in the present tense. Their 501c3 status is still active. They still have a board, but they don't have the space to make safer. And without a dedicated space, it's really hard to achieve what Dreamland had been able to during this time. In April of 2017, the exhibition African Prince, works by, unfortunately it's really hard to see on that, Andy Jerame. In May of 2017, Lutalisa, I don't know, by Danielle Matejevich. I really couldn't find any more images of this other than this one. So again, anybody who might be listening or watching who might have more images, please let me know. Other significant events that happened in 2016, again, the Free Store opened. There was a Buffalo Artist Advocacy Group meeting that happened. If not for, I actually got the date wrong on that one. But I do think if things had gone differently for Dreamland, there would have been more artist advocacy groups that happened. But even though my date is incorrect on that, this is kind of getting towards the end of the Franklin Street location story. Consent, or How to Have Sex in a Police State, a film and discussion about HIV and the queer community. And the multiple film discussions, as well as the Real Queer film series, continued to happen. So on June 10th of 2017, for the second year in a row, Dreamland hosted an event during the Allentown Arts Festival. And so this year it was a kind of different theme than the year prior. This year it was an anti-arts fest free garage sale. So they literally took the free store, where everything is free, and they put it out in the front yard. And I don't need to pull up that image again of before, but there is a noticeable difference between the location of the Allentown Arts Fest and Dreamland. You know, they are renters who have a front yard, and they are giving things away for free. It's a very sort of, very metal or sort of display here. But this is what it looked like. This is what it was. Look how lovely. Nice organized clothes, people checking it out, people sitting on the steps. It's beautiful. So they did that for the 10th, I believe probably the 2 days of the festival, so maybe they did it the 10th and the 11th, I think. But the free store contained everything from clean/cool-ass clothing, books, comics, magazines for all your collaging needs, furniture, art supplies, yarn, musical instruments, LPs, CDs, and it was all free. I know this is blurry, but 5 days later, they received a cease and desist notice from the city of Buffalo, which reads that you are to cease all operations immediately. Do not open the establishment. The reason is because there are no city licenses for music, dance, and/or public assembly. And so here's a sort of better image of it. And so I'm going to read their post from that day. It says, this afternoon, Dreamland was issued a cease and desist from the city of Buffalo. This effectively halts all programming, events, performances, and film screenings at the site and puts Dreamland itself in danger of losing the gallery and the artist studios above it. For 3 years, Dreamland has remained alive through the diligence of the space's unpaid volunteers, the rent from the second-floor artist studios, and donations from hosting various events. Over 550 events that have included solo and group art shows, musical performances, film screenings, LGBTQIA+ workshops, adult sex education workshops, and more. Despite our longevity and extensive programming, Dreamland has never received corporate sponsorship or government grants. With events shut down and our event donations stifled, we are in severe danger of losing the place because of an inability to pay rent and utilities. So then they go on to ask for help in this next chapter. And so there's a couple of things here, like again, yes, as anarcho-punks, there were some permits for public assembly that they needed to get from the city. But they had also been existing for 3 years at this point with absolutely no issue with the city. The reason the city gave all right, so actually, I'll go to the next slide. So look at this beautiful illustration. This is an original illustration depicting everyone involved with Dreamland. Dana, the berserker orc, Seth, the druidic elf, Ron, the high elven swordsman, Lisa, the halfling bard thief, Amber, the trident-wielding Selkie, Cynthia the fawn, Mike the mage, and dark elf drow. And I like to think of them all as like going into battle against the cease and desist notice. So what happened? So all events at Dreamland ceased after June 15th, 2017, and never resumed at the Franklin Street building again, though they had just renewed their lease in early 2017. The crux of the issue seems to be that the building was not up to code for a venue space, specifically because the bathroom was not ADA compliant. Though I will say they had a ramp, which was so much more than so many venues in the city have. So some of the challenges are also into like the nuance of it. When Dreamland first signed their lease in 2013, the landlord, or the person they thought to be the landlord, knew their intent to use it as a venue space with artist studios upstairs. The landlord never said that the building was not compliant for the purpose that they wanted to use it for as a venue. Once the city came down on Dreamland for a non-compliant ADA bathroom, the landlord refused to fund any alterations, though they were fine with Dreamland paying for the changes. Through various fundraisers, Dreamland successfully raised about $10,000. I mean, that's huge. That's massive. With this money, Dreamland hired architects and lawyers and moved forward with getting blueprints drawn up for alterations to the bathroom, which also shows that, like, if the city was coming at that for a public assembly permit, that's different than the bathroom. So all of a sudden the city's like is interested with working with them with the bathroom issue. And so the public assembly issue does not seem to have been the crux that it seemed to be when the cease and desist notice first showed up. The costs soon outpaced Dreamland's ability to bring in revenue because they couldn't host any shows. They couldn't bring in, money from shows or rentals. And it was really difficult for the people who lived there as well. And so they had a hard time even collecting rent. During this time as well, Dana McKnight was in the process of moving away, which did impact the collective. Between having to pay the rent, paying the lawyer, and the architect, the funds raised dried up by the end of 2017. There are some other challenges as well that were identified in this process that made it so that it was not advisable for Dreamland to stay at this building. There was some information that the lawyer, identified that made it so that even if this bathroom sort of happened, it maybe wasn't as much of a sure thing as it seemed. And there were a lot of layers of misinformation that was coming at Dreamland. And so one thing I have found difficult is how, not just with Dreamland, but with many sort of arts initiatives, is how, they come at you like you have to have this, and this. But a lot of the time you find that the entities telling you those things are not following their own rules, or the rules are not the same across the board. And it tends to be that, those discrepancies affect, again, the smallest and the most marginalized amongst us. But not the biggest organizations. So the cease and desist notice happened just before infringement of that year. And so this is from the infringement handout from that year, where it said, "So, about Dreamland. As many of you know, our beloved venue, Dreamland, has been temporarily closed to public events. We are hoping that the situation will be resolved soon, but as of print time, all events scheduled there have been rescheduled elsewhere." And it's a fundraising party that Buffalo Rising promoted. There's actually one thing I wanted to say before going on. One thing that is really crucial and ended up being a huge point in their favor is that by having the 501c3 status, by having nonprofit status as this collective, all the members of Dreamland were protected should the landlord want to come after the members of Dreamland, either for wear and tear on use of the space, or the fact that they had signed a lease and then maybe I had to back out of it or something like that. But by having 501c3 status, all the individual artists were protected, and so they could not be taken to court individually for whatever the lawyer or city or anybody wanted. And so I also think it's really important to point out that Dreamland's 501c3 status still exists, and there's many points within Dreamland's history where the collective would sometimes look towards who are we passing this off to next? What's the next generation of Dreamland, and how can we support them with their own vision? And so that sort of like bubble of support still exists. And if there are people who want to invigorate Dreamland with their own vision and a different direction, there is potential for that. The nonprofit status is like this shield that can kind of help protect you, and the founders of Dreamland did some of the hardest parts already. So there is that. To lose an inclusive art space that genuinely cared about creating safer spaces over the cost of an ADA compliant bathroom hurts. It really hurts. Dreamland probably needed another $20,000 tops to make this happen. The building itself, though, admittedly, there was a lot of issues with the building as well, but Dreamland was more compliant for creating a safer space, creating accessible spaces than many places in the city of Buffalo. Dreamland needed just a little push of support to get to that next hurdle. And they didn't get that support, and because of that today, we don't have Dreamland the way we did anymore because of it. I mean, here we are, now we're in 2019, and the city of Buffalo has found multiple millions of dollars to give to the Albright Knox. And I'd like you all to kind of think about if the city could have found $20,000 to give to Dreamland, or if they could have just tried to work with them more collaboratively rather than coming down on them. I mean, the discrepancies, $2 million versus $20,000. And Dreamland created a space that was accessible for people who don't see themselves represented in the larger galleries, in other more established spaces, you know, and to have that taken away, and to have the establishments and the neighbors and everybody really fail to see how important this space was and what it was creating for people that they probably didn't think about too much to begin with. Though again, that is my personal perspective, and it's conjecture. And also that they got them on a ADA compliant bathroom. You know, like Dreamland was more accessible and made more space for people who are differently abled, again, than a lot of places in this city. And that really was outside of their control and something that they adamantly tried to deal with once they were made aware. It really breaks my heart. So in February of this year, Dana Tyrell had an exhibition of their own work of rubbings that they took from Dreamland before they vacated the building in late 2017. And so very much in the style of grave rubbings. They went around the various spaces at Dreamland and took, at the Franklin Street location, and took rubbings of different surfaces. And so for Dana, for Dana Tyrell, it's especially bittersweet because they were really just starting to coalesce and organize this curatorial committee, you know, very much focused on what was going to be the next established chapter of Dreamland's life in that building, and how it could be more equitably structured and the weight shared better, and just had all these ideas, and then to really just have the rug pulled out from under them it was very hard. So Dana organized a series of exhibitions. This wasn't completely part of the series that they organized, but this was the first sort of decentralized Dreamland exhibition they did. But then throughout this past year, Dana Tyrell has coordinated and curated the Dreamy exhibition series. And so they write, the Dreamy exhibition series is a series of nomadic exhibitions curated by Dreamland in an effort to reconstitute the organizational's visual arts branch. This comes in the wake of Dreamland being forced to leave its first home at 387 Franklin Street in the heart of Buffalo. Dreamland's long-term goal is to raise enough money to purchase a property within the city of Buffalo and renew our commitment to Buffalo as a coalition of artists, activists, curators, and volunteers dedicated to Dreamland's mission of providing a cultural alternative for artists and patrons of the arts in the greater Buffalo area. So I had a really good conversation with Dana about their time with Dreamland and what they're still continuing to try to do. And so they put in a lot of work this year into organizing this sort of decentralized series. But I think it was about the fourth exhibition or third or fourth exhibition. Oh, and I was actually wrong. Here I see that the rubbing exhibition is part of the Dreamland, the Dreamy exhibition series. So I was incorrect earlier when I said that. But I think it was the third or fourth show that they organized in this series. No one showed up to the opening. And I don't know what the weather was like. I don't know. I also wasn't there. But it was around that time that Dana and the other board members really had to step back and say, okay, what are we doing? And does this still have the same momentum? And nobody showing up to an opening is just so dramatically different from those stairs that I could show you at Franklin Street just overflowing with people. And I think that, I don't think that says that we don't need Dreamland or what Dreamland provided. I think that it really shows how crucial it is to have a foundational space, that you make the rules of, and that you can fight to say that it is a safer space, and you can enforce that, both with love and with kicking out people if you need to. And that it's really hard to hold on to nomadic community, especially when you're working with, or you're trying to draw in people who are so marginalized already that having to go to different places can be a barrier. Not knowing where the places are can be a barrier. Not trusting that you're actually going to be as safe in that space is a barrier. And I think the fact that the community isn't showing up shows how much we need Dreamland more than ever, because they're still there, we're still here, We just don't know where to go, and we don't know where each other is. And we don't know how to let our freak flag fly because we don't have Dreamland. We don't have that space. And we still have the people, and even those who have moved on, moved on for the right reasons, and anyone can make the next generation of what Dreamland becomes. It is not one vision, but so long as that central mission is held on to, I think we need Dreamland more than ever. In close, thank you all for spending this time here tonight. Yay.